welcome, fellow Wasteland survivors. I'm Dean, and thanks for stopping in, hanging out with me, because today's video is a basic introduction to the logic gates. So, we're back out at our electrical set on Spectacle Island. This is where we created most of our electrical tips and tricks videos, so what better place to do the logic gates than here? Now, I'm not a betting man, but I'll bet nickels to dollars that if you think back to the very first time you ever seen the logic gates, you went, yeah, so did I. The very first time that I ever opened up the workshop menu and I seen the logic gates, I thought to myself, what could we possibly need these for? And what are they even? Well, the logic gates were brought to us from the Contraptions Workshop DLC. They were supposed to coincide with the manufacturing section. And because of this, it would allow us to wire and connect all of our manufacturing systems up in a very sophisticated way. Now, when the game developers came up with this, it was a great idea. But they failed to take one thing into consideration. That's right. We still haven't got a clue what a logic gate is. To better help us understand what a logic gate is, what it does, and how we can use it, we first need to take a look at a regular switch. Now, these are the three most commonly used switches in Fallout. They require the user to toggle a lever to an on or off position. When most players are talking about switches, these are usually the three they're referring to. But in our inventory, we have many objects that can be considered or used as a switch. Now, as we take a look at these objects, there's something I need to explain real quick, because it'll become very important a little later on in the video. Just because all of these objects can toggle power on or off, it does not mean that they all do it in the same way. So, because of that, each and every one of these objects would fall into or under one of two different categories. The first category is called manual. A manual switch is a switch that the player has to highlight and activate before it will toggle power on or off. The second category is called electrical. And as an example of an electrical switch, we're going to use a laser tripwire. Even though the body trips the wire, we are not targeting it and activating it to toggle power on or off. And that is why it falls under the electrical category. Okay, now that we've covered those basics, let's get back to our switches. We need to see how a switch actually works. So let's take a closer look. Really, Bones? Not that close of a look. Okay, real quick, before we get started, I've got a disclaimer. I am not an electrician. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a scientist, I'm just me. And even though we're going to be using a lot of these electrical symbols to help illustrate what we're talking about, they may be incorrect. So please, try not to beat me up too much in the comments. Okay, now what we're looking at is a symbol representation of a switch. Now there's something that you need to keep in mind. A switch has to have a minimum of 2 inputs and 1 output. It can have more, but it can never have less. So let's take a look at our switch. The line that's in the middle on the left-hand side is an input, and it is usually referred to as base or gate. Now from here on out, we're going to refer to this part of the switch as gate, because that's exactly what it is. This input source will open and close this little bar that looks like a gate. So, if we're using a manual switch and we're toggling the lever on and off, that is the input source to the gate. And right now, our lever is in the off position, so our gate is open. Now, our second input to our switch is often referred to as source. I think this makes it absolutely clear what this input is. This is where our electrical source will enter the switch. Also keep this in mind. Source does not affect gate in any way. Alright, now that we have our two inputs connected, let's take a look at our output. The output is usually referred to as result, or the result. And the result that we're looking for with our switch is to be able to turn a light on, and we'll use this circle to represent that. Now, in logic gate terms, the best way to explain our switch is A, gate, plus B, source, equals C, result. And right now our switch is off, so the result is our light is off. Alright, now let's flip our lever to the on position. By doing this, the input to the gate has changed. Now the gate, instead of being opened, is closed. And this allows a direct line from source, our power, to result, our light. Now, in logic gate terms, this can be explained by A, gate, plus B, source, equals C, result. And the result is our light is on. Okay, by now, I'll bet you never look at an electrical switch the same way ever again, right? Right. Okay, before we continue, let's recap real quick. First thing we did is we took a regular electrical switch and then we broke it down using logic gate terms. And since we all know how a regular electrical switch works, it will help us better understand some of the terminology that is used in describing logic gates and their functions. Now, there is another thing that we learned from this demonstration, or I should say we answered our first question. And that is, what is a logic gate? Well, a logic gate is nothing more than a high-tech switch that requires multiple inputs to achieve a specific result. Okay, have I put you to sleep yet? I hope not. I promise, ladies and gentlemen, if you stay to the end of the video, this will all make sense, and you'll look at logic gates in a completely different way. Okay, what we're looking at right now is a symbol representation of a transistor. Now, there's a lot one could know about transistors, and we're not going to see any of it. We're just using the basics of what a transistor is, so that way we can better understand how it's used in electrical switches and logic gates. Now, the first thing to notice about this transistor is that it resembles our switch symbol. And it's not too far from the truth. It has two inputs and one output. The difference is the input that's gate will not be toggled by a lever. We will use electrical signal or electricity to open or close the gate. So, electricity will be the lever. Okay, now that we know that we have two powers going into the inputs and we have one output, let's try to explain this transistor. And we'll use what I think is called, and I could be very wrong here, Boolean logic or Boolean algebra. And we're going to use the basics of that to help us explain this switch. So, we're going to have no power represented as 0. Power will be represented as 1. And now these are the four formulas that we could come up with to explain this transistor. Now, none of our formulas have a result. And that's where the logic gate comes into play. Depending upon our formula and the logic gate, that will dictate what our result is. And this is a great example to show why we need two different sources going to the logic gates that we find in Fallout 4. Well, how are we doing so far? I think we've gotten a pretty good look at the basics of how these switches work and the terminology that's used to describe their functions. So there's only one thing left to do. We need to try to understand a little bit more about what logic is. Now, once again, this is known as Boolean logic or Boolean algebra. And I can best describe it using this rectangle and Fallout 4. Okay, imagine this rectangle is full of people playing Fallout 4. Some of the players are wearing T45 power armor. Some of the players are wearing X01 power armor. All of the players in this circle are the ones wearing T45 power armor. All of the players in this circle are the ones wearing X01 power armor. And all of the people that are in the shaded red area are players that are wearing both T45 and X01 power armor. So what we've got is this group of players in the shaded red area are wearing T45 and X01 power armor. The group of players in this area are wearing T45 but are not wearing X01. The group of players in this area are wearing X01 but are not wearing T45. And all around the outside are players who are neither wearing T45 or X01. In terms of logic, this is known as AND, because what we're saying is T45 and X01. This is known as OR. In other words, either you're wearing T45 or X01 or possibly both. This is known as NOT. That is to say that the player is not wearing T45 or X01 or possibly both. Okay, we now know what a logic gate does. It is that it transforms its specific logic into an electronic form. And since the only electronic form that we have in Fallout is power, that is the result from the gate and the source. Okay, finally, we're outside. Let's take a little closer look at what a Fallout 4 logic gate looks like. Now there's a couple of things to take notice of. First of all, the emblem in the center is the symbol for AND. As you can see on the left-hand side, it has two lines. Those are the input. On the right-hand side, it has one line. That is the output. So, since a Fallout 4 logic gate only has two connections, the red side of the logic gate is where both gate and source will need to be connected. The black side is the result, and that'll be connected to whichever electrical object you're powering. Now, if you'll notice where it says AND logic gate, it now says out 0 in the right-hand corner. Every time you connect a power line up, this will change and it will add in whatever you've connected. First, we connected the out, and it has no power, so it said 0. Second, we connected an in. It has no power, so it says 0. The second switch is an in because of gate and source, but there is no power, so they all still say 0. Okay, now let's see what happens when we turn on one of these power sources. As soon as we flip the switch on, the logic gate becomes active, and we can see some green lights around the red side of the logic gate. Also, there's a little amber color light in the upper left hand corner. Now what this is doing is it's telling us that we have one of our inputs. And as soon as we add the second input and we have met the requirements of the AND logic gate, the black connection side, the output, gets a green light around that. And that lets us know that it's transmitting power. Yeah, let's change our light box, and I think to purple. Alright, now that we have everything on, let's take a quick look at what it looks like in work mode. And where it says AND logic gate, we can see it says switched power in 1, switched power in 1, light box out 1. So our result is, because of A gate plus B source equals C result. Okay, the next switch is called the NAND logic gate. There's also a couple of things that we need to take note of here. The emblem in the center is exactly the same as the AND logic gate, with one exception. Where the output is on the symbol, there's a little round circle. And any time that you see a round circle like that on the output, that means that this logic gate does the opposite of the logic gate that it's named after. So, since this logic gate is named after the AND logic gate, hence the name NAND, it will operate and work opposite of the way the AND logic gate worked. Let's turn our power off real quick. That way we can see everything as we're connecting it up, and it just doesn't come on. Alright, we'll connect up our red side to both of the switches. Now that we have our gate, we have our source, we have our light box, which is our result. Let's go ahead and see how it works. Okay. As soon as we turn on one switch, the logic gate becomes active. When we turn the switch off, of course it goes off because it has no more power. We turn on the second switch, and once again, the logic gate becomes active. Now let's see what happens when we turn on both switches. Well, it's going to go off. The reason is it does the opposite of what the AND logic gate does. Since we need two powers on to transmit power with the AND logic gate, when we apply two powers to the NAND logic gate, then it will not work. But any other configuration, it will transmit power, with the exception of both switches being off. Of course, if both switches are off, how can it be on? Okay, the next two logic gates are pretty complicated, so we're just going to gloss over them for this video. This is the NOR logic gate, and if you'll notice, on the emblem in the center, it does have a circle on the output. So the NOR logic gate does the opposite of what the OR logic gate does, and we'll see that shortly. This is the NOT logic gate, and it has a circle on the output side of it as well. Now, even though they say they're the same thing, they're not. And once again, we'll cover that in the next video, where we can spend a little more time and explain the complicity of those two logic gates. Alright, now let's take a look at the OR logic gate. The OR logic gate transmits power if any input has power. So let's quickly hook this puppy up so we can see that in action. Now what's going to happen with the OR logic gate is as soon as any one of these switches come on in any configuration, it will transmit power. So that is the logic of the OR gate. As long as any combination of switches are on, it will transmit power. The only way that it would not transmit power is if both switches were in the off position. And once again, the reason it wouldn't do that is how can you transmit power if you're not sending any power to the logic gate? The next logic gate is called the XNOR logic gate. It transmits power when all inputs are the same, powered or unpowered. Now this is another complicated logic gate, so we'll save it to the next video. And finally, our last logic gate, and it is called the XOR logic gate. It transmits power if exactly one input has power. So let's hook it up real quick and see what that does. Now the way the logic for the XOR gate works is as long as one of these two switches is on, the logic gate will be active. If we switch both switches on, then we do not fit the requirements for this logic gate. So the logic for the XOR logic gate is that it has to have exactly one power before it transmits power. Okay, now that we've seen 4 of the 7 logic gates, let's see if we can use logic to describe each one of the logic gates. Let's start with the AND. Transmits power if all inputs have power. Logic. All players wearing T45 and X01. Okay, next is the NAND gate. Transmits power unless all inputs have power. Logic. Requires players wearing T45, but not players wearing X01, and not players possibly wearing both. Next is the OR logic gate. Transmits power if any input has power. Logic. Any player wearing T45 or X01 or possibly both. And our final logic gate is the XOR. Transmits power if exactly one input has power. Logic. Needs players wearing T45 or X01, but not players wearing possibly both. Okay, before we go today, I have one final tip for you. Well, I guess it's actually more of a recap than it is a tip, but it does come in 2 parts. First of all, it's the switches. Anytime that you have 2 switches together wired to one logic gate, you now have what we call a formula. So, as an example, both switches are on. That's a formula. One switch is off, one switch is on. That's a formula. If the other switch is on and the other switch is off, that's the third formula. And finally, if both switches are off, that would be considered the 4th formula. So, if you're wiring logic gates, there's only 4 possible ways that you can operate the logic gate. So, keep that in mind. Okay, for the second part, it is the representation of power in Fallout and the logic gates. Remember, 0 represents no power. 1 represents power. We're not adding them together, subtracting them, or anything. That is just a numerical representation to show if you have power or not. Okay, there we go, ladies and gentlemen, a basic overview of logic gates. Now, this video could be called anything but basic, but realistically, logic gates are extremely complicated, and I felt that we needed to see this other than just hooking them up to power and going, oh, hey, look, it's on. And now that we have a better understanding of logic gates, we can now be more creative by using logic gates for our electrical needs in our settlements. You know, other than powering manufacturing objects or the ball tracks or even the electrical door, which, by the way, that is a pretty cool idea. So, in the next video, we're going to try to see if we can come up with some practical uses for logic gates. So I hope to see you then. Alright everybody, thank you for dropping in. I really do appreciate you coming, spending your precious time with me. And just like always, please, until next time, stay safe and peace.